Coming up from Call to Mind, homelessness in the United States reached a record high last year. On any given night, more than 500,000 people are living homeless in this country. Many of them have untreated mental illnesses, and the experience of living homeless can trigger more problems.
If you imagine living on the street, you can't be assured of your safety or security. That kind of alarm in the person's nervous system is exhausting.
I'm Kimberly Adams. Ahead on the homelessness crisis and mental health, we'll hear from people who've experienced homelessness.
Being homeless, it's hard. Then I very rarely ate. My main problem was the crack. I was depressed. So I made something to lift me up, you understand?
And we'll hear from experts who say the best mental health care for people living homeless is housing.
What happens to someone on their house? Their life immediately gets better.
Over the coming hour, the homelessness crisis and mental health. First, this news. A note to our listeners, this program mentions suicide and self-harm. If you or someone you know is struggling, know that trained help is available. Call or text 988 and you'll be connected to a crisis counselor as soon as possible. A few blocks from the hustle of New York City's Times Square is a large former hotel called, the Times Square. It's now a supportive housing residence for low-income and formerly homeless people and people living with a serious mental illness or HIV/AIDS. There, we met John Felice. He's 60 years old and a native New Yorker. John spent decades living homeless before a nonprofit social services organization called Breaking Ground helped him get a subsidized apartment at the Times Square.
I've been blessed with 2 electric burners, little toaster oven, I got a sink, a bathroom, and a little bed. I am so content with that for what I pay. Thank you, man, because now I get the SSI, so the income will always be there. Not like I'm hustling on the streets. No more mosquitoes. Oh, God, it's wonderful, this building. My doctor comes here, the psychiatrist comes here. The nurse, she cured my hepatitis C, which I carried for years. That's why I'm content, really.
But it was a long journey to get here. John battled addiction and untreated mental illness for decades. He dropped out of high school and lived with his parents until his life unraveled.
I came back one night and the lock was changed because I started robbing the family to support my drug addiction. And they couldn't take it anymore, I've been suicidal since I was about 17, cutting myself with razors and all that. I had a death wish, you could say. And I took to the streets. I stayed in my area, what do you do? Actually, I went to the subway first. But the subway's no way to live or sleep, but I didn't know what to do. And then I started building spots outside. And believe it or not, I did it for 17 years.
Over those years, John lived in tents, under bridges, and in shelters. He scraped together what money he could by doing odd jobs like collecting cans or shoveling sidewalks. John says finding food was a daily battle.
Being homeless, it's hard. Then I very rarely ate. Was getting welfare for a bit, and then they just cut me off. I'm like, how you going to cut off a homeless man's food stamps, My main problem was the crack, because I believe this, with addiction, you do the drug the opposite you feel. I was depressed, so I made something to lift me up, you understand? Yeah.
But the high from drugs doesn't last. At one point, John tried to end his life.
I cut my wrist, and when I hung myself, the rope broke. I knocked myself out because I was by the train track. The train woke me up. Pitch dark. I said, is this hell? It can't be hell. I'm alive. But that's it. I stopped. I said, let the Lord take my last breath. I'm not doing it no more. But I was real despondent on those streets. I gave up.
After many years of living rough, John connected with the Breaking Ground social service organization. They helped him get into his apartment at the Times Square and to a life he'd hardly thought possible. John is one of several people we talk to who have experienced homelessness. All their stories are unique and different, and we'll hear from them throughout this program. You're listening to the Homelessness Crisis and Mental Health, a broadcast special from Call to Mind, American Public Media's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health. I'm Kimberly Adams. Homelessness in the United States reached a record high in 2023. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, more than 650,000 people experience homelessness on any given night. At least half of that number were in shelters or transitional housing. Others were living unsheltered, staying outside on the street or in places not meant for long-term residents, like in cars or tent encampments. For context, the number of people living homeless on any given night in the United States is a population larger than the city of Las Vegas. This program explores homelessness and the role of mental illness in this ongoing crisis. We'll hear firsthand from people about their experiences and what they needed most. And we'll hear from experts about solutions they say could end homelessness. We also want to mention this program will focus on single adults. Families, of course, also experience homelessness, and people lose their homes to storms and disasters. But we're going to focus on the people we often see on the street and wonder how they got there. Dr. Sam Simbaris is a community and clinical psychologist. He spent his career working with people who are homeless and struggle with mental illness. His work started at the Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital in New York City. Then he founded Pathways to Housing, a national organization providing housing and wraparound support services. He now lives in Los Angeles. Dr. Simbaris says there's an overlap between mental illness and homelessness, but we need to look at it a different way.
The typical public perception is that people on the street, especially those we see outside with their belongings, appear to also have mental health problems. The controversial question about the connection is what causes what. Does homelessness cause mental illness, or is it the way that most people believe that mental illness causes the homelessness?
So then, how often do serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, or something like that factor into someone becoming homeless?
Not very often at all. In this country, we have maybe 14 million people that are diagnosed, according to Medicaid data, with a severe mental illness. The vast majority of those people are not homeless. We only have maybe 1 million altogether people who are homeless, and a subset of those have a severe mental illness. So does severe mental illness predict homelessness? Absolutely not. And why aren't people with severe mental illness on the street? Because they have family, or they have resources, or they're in a program, they're being taken care of somewhere. So that group that's homeless, that's a different story.
If someone wasn't experiencing mental health concerns prior to becoming unhoused, what might happen to them while living homeless to trigger mental health concerns?
If you imagine living on the street or in an abandoned building or some place where you feel just modestly safe, the fundamental psychological burden of homelessness is survival. You can't be assured of your safety or security. You can't be assured that you'll have a meal. You can't be assured that you won't be attacked or assaulted by someone who's more desperate. So that kind of alarm in the person's nervous system and their day-to-day survival mode is exhausting. The adrenaline, the lack of sleep. People have experienced a lot of trauma where they have in fact been assaulted, raped, robbed. You can imagine that it escalates very, very quickly with no reprieve. It's not like this happened to you, now you can go back. You had a terrible experience, now you're going back to your home. It's like you're homeless, these terrible things happen, and you're still homeless, and you're still at risk for more terrible things happening. So the psychological assault on the person's psychically, physically, emotionally, spiritually is devastating and continuous.
Dr. Simbaris is well known in homeless services. People call him the father of the housing first movement. He and his colleagues developed this model while visiting clients living on the street.
We were actually operating a street outreach team for people with severe mental illness, and also trying to determine if they were a danger to themselves or others. And we would involuntarily hospitalize people if we felt it was unsafe to leave them on the street. I spent years on that outreach job. Over time, the pattern was evident that people would be going to the hospital and then back on the street. I mean, some people we didn't see and we hoped they ended up somewhere, but far too many were coming back. And we needed to do something different. The hospital system was not interested in a housing program, so we ended up creating Pathways to Housing, a nonprofit organization, got a grant from the State Office of Mental Health, and started to invite people who were on the street, actively symptomatic, because we knew them now. It's not like because someone has a severe mental illness, you can't get to know them. They know what they like. They know what they don't like. They know, what's good for them. They know who to trust. And so we said to them, how can we best help you? And they said, isn't it obvious? I need a place to live. And we started renting apartments and putting people in. And of course, we wouldn't leave them alone. I mean, we were nervous about how they would do. And so the program became putting people in housing right away, housing first. But, I'm a psychologist, we had a social worker, a nurse. We would make home visits all the time to make sure that the person was okay. And now that you're housed, what else can we do? You want to get back into treatment. People wanted to reconnect with their family. They wanted to take care of their health. Like life began to happen in a completely different way. And it surprised us beyond our expectations that people would do so well.
When did you start realizing how effective it was?
So in the first year, we housed 50 people, like pretty much finding about an apartment each week and someone was going in. And of course, you're so busy like looking for apartments and the person, get the furniture, move, the lease, the landlords, and the thing that you remember the most are the problem situations. Someone moves in. One person sold all their furniture because they were had a severe addiction. It's like, oh my God, we didn't anticipate this, But what we were doing from the very start was measuring who succeeded and who didn't. At the end of that 12 months, how many people were still in housing? And when we cranked up the numbers, contrary to our very busy and crisis-oriented experience, 84% of the people that had gone into housing stayed in housing.
Wow.
That was mind-blowing.
What has the data shown since then? Because people eventually did start trying out your model. There are pathways to housing in many places. What has the data shown since then?
Well, that 84% success rate for housing stability that we got in that very first year, that same pattern of findings has been replicated, I would say, in over 40 cities now. So there's recently, there was a systematic review by the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, where they looked at 26 randomized controlled trials of housing first compared to treatment as usual. And they concluded that there was an average of 88% housing stability rate across those 26 trials. It's been demonstrated to be a robust, very effective intervention for this population across many political, cultural, geographic areas.
So an 88% success rate for housing first, as opposed to giving someone treatment for their mental health issues first and then putting them in housing. What's the success rate for that in comparison?
It ranges between 30 and 40%.
So you're talking twice as effective.
Twice
basically.
as effective, yes, from the onset. And it's also, the treatment as usual, sort of the treatment first, then housing, includes a requirement for mental health stability, if you will, no symptoms. Which is very hard to achieve, especially if you're homeless, and sobriety, like 3 months, 6 months, 12 months of sobriety before you can get in. So that's a very steep climb for people who are experiencing homelessness.
So you've outlined how Housing First helps people who are living homeless, but once they're in that apartment, what do you see about how that housing first helps an unhoused person's mental health.
What happens to someone with severe mental illness when they're housed? Like their life immediately gets a lot better. I mean, they have a door where they can lock and feel safe and secure. They can decide when they want to take a shower, when to turn on the lights or turn off the lights. They can decide when to eat or what to eat. All these things that we take for granted every single day. When you're homeless, you cannot decide. You'll eat when you find food or when the shelter decides to serve it. You'll go to bed when the shelter says lights out and when the lights are on. Like you have no control of your life at all. So this sense of safety and security calms down that survival, fear, adrenalized life that we were talking about when people are homeless. That's a huge change in the quality of their life. It doesn't cure mental illness or addiction, but it helps people with mental illness and addiction have a much, much better life. There's still a lot of work to be done after the person is housed. They're still poor, and they need benefits or trying to find a job that's meaningful. So it takes people off the streets, out of shelters, into a decent, affordable place, because all of these homes are subsidized, and gives people a chance to build a life.
Our program is exploring housing as mental health care. Is it fair to refer to housing in that way as mental health care?
Oh, it's absolutely fair to refer to housing as mental health care. People working at the street level medicine have always said, I wish I could write a prescription for housing. Housing is healthcare. I mean, I can't say it more clearly than that.
That was Dr. Sam Simbaris, the founder of Pathways to Housing. You're listening to The Homelessness Crisis and Mental Health, a broadcast special from Call to Mind. I'm Kimberly Adams. As the name suggests, the Housing First model focuses on getting people into permanent housing first, rather than requiring them to tackle other problems like mental health conditions, substance use disorders, or unemployment in exchange for a place to live. It's tough to measure how many people had a mental illness before they became homeless. The experience of living homeless can add to mental health problems or start new ones. The success of Housing First isn't theoretical. Other countries like Finland and Sweden have adopted Housing First and have nearly ended street homelessness. But how realistic is Housing First in the United States, especially in major cities with high housing costs? We go next to Houston, Texas, the nation's fourth most populous city. Houston ranks dead last in access to mental health care, according to the nonprofit Mental Health America. Compared to other cities, it has a relatively weak social safety net. But the city invested in a housing-first approach to end homelessness, and it's been transformative. Houston's homelessness initiative, The Way Home, moved 30,000 people off the streets and into permanent housing. Marketplace reporter Elizabeth Trovel has more.
In the Midtown neighborhood at the urban core of Houston, I'm led in through the gate of a tan residential building. Standing on the patio outside, TJ Broden greets me wearing a gray sweatshirt.
Nice to meet you.
Broden is originally from New Orleans, but grew up mostly in Houston, where he played a lot of football.
In high school, I was good. When I got to college, I started actually playing the ball and catching interceptions and stuff like that.
Sports were his outlet to deal with the world until he got out of school.
When you have anger problems in football, you can take it out easily. So, when you not playing sports no more, it's hard to deal with.
Fast forward to a year and a half ago. Broden is in his mid-20s, has a job, a home, and he starts to hear voices.
It was real bad, hearing voices, them trying to control you and tell you what to do.
The voices were a symptom of untreated schizoaffective disorder, and they got worse. He says they got so loud he couldn't hear his own voice, but he felt like he couldn't tell anyone, even his mom.
The voices had me angry at my family, so we went through a lot.
He isolated himself, and his life kind of fell out from under him. He lost his job, an apartment. He began to live on the streets. Roden says he spent a year or so without a home, and the voices, which he heard all the time, followed him as he moved from place to place.
Do you feel like when you lost housing, did that make it worse?
Definitely. Them voices will beat you up. Yeah, them voices will get to you like real bad. Like, it definitely got worse. Yeah, and they keep you up. Like, I remember, like, at one point, I stayed up for like 3 days.
His loss of his home and his job, not addressing his schizoaffective disorder, all of that made his mental health worse, which is not uncommon, says Wayne Young, CEO of the Harris County Public Mental Health Authority.
There's all kinds of kind of interconnectedness between housing and mental health and recovery and stability.
He says a large share of people experiencing homelessness have a behavioral health condition, mental illness, or a substance use disorder. These can be challenging cycles to break, though Houston's Housing First model has helped many do just that. The group coordinating the model is the Coalition for the Homeless, which Mike Nichols ran for the last 5 years. He attributes Houston's success to 3 things:
organization, pragmatism, and scale.
The coalition brings together more than 100 partner organizations guided by one North Star, providing permanent housing for the most vulnerable. Their collaboration is called The Way Home, and it really came together in 2011.
We wanted to have a coordinated access. Everybody who is assessed for housing would come through and have the same kind of assessment profile done. And then the coalition would be the ones that would rank them most vulnerable to least vulnerable.
And with limited resources, they would only house, to put it crudely, the people
most likely to die on the street.
Some of the stakeholders asked, why not prioritize the people most likely to be successfully self-sufficient?
And the answer was that it's morally and fiscally correct to house the most vulnerable first. Morally, because we don't want people to die on the street. Physically, because it's so expensive to have people live on the street.
And nonprofits had to forfeit some of their autonomy to make this work. At the time, Tau Costas worked for one of them that controlled its own housing units.
But now the inventory or the occupancy of these units was up to our community. The system would prioritize and decide, okay, here's the person on the list that needs it. If you have a vacancy, we're going to send that person to see if they want to live in your unit.
Costas, who now runs community services for Harris County, says they did a good job of scaling up tested models, starting with housing 100 homeless veterans in 100 days. They built on that success, securing additional federal support through the local housing authorities that subsidize rent, which have helped the coalition set aside apartments. Now, on any given night in Houston, around 9,000 formerly homeless people are in permanent housing. Let's circle back to TJ Broden. Eventually, he started cycling through the local public health system. When he was at the hospital, he wouldn't talk about his mental illness, but then he met someone like him who had gotten an apartment through the coalition.
I was like, all right. It just hit me one day to just be honest.
He started talking about the voices when he was in a county psychiatric bed. He stabilized and applied for housing, which he got.
Not everybody get to make it in there. Everybody don't get that chance, and I'm just grateful to God that I got in, you know, because it helped me a lot. It changed my life. Like, the staff were amazing. Like, I got back to myself in there. Got back to that loving person, that light, like to have fun.
Now he has a year of stability before he'll have to move out and find a place of his own. He's looking for a decent job to save up for rent when he moves out and one day help out his mom. The voices are gone. He's taking his meds. He likes his therapist, and he's optimistic about the future. For Call to Mind, I'm Elizabeth Troval from Marketplace.
We need to take a break. When we come back, some people have an increased risk of homelessness and needs that require some unique solutions. We'll have more on the homelessness crisis and mental health from Call to Mind. Welcome back to the homelessness crisis and mental health. a broadcast special from Call to Mind, American Public Media's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health. I'm Kimberly Adams. The federal government says a person is chronically homeless when they've lived unhoused for at least a year and are living someplace not meant for people to live, in a car or outside on the street or in a park. These cases can be challenging because the person is usually living with an untreated serious mental illness or with a complex health condition. So street outreach teams that work with this group of people are a mix of service providers, social workers, peer counselors, psychiatrists. They collaborate to help with basic needs like food, health services, wellness checks, and more. Call to Mind's producer Jessica Bari spent a day with a street psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist Joanna Freed starts her workday in New York City, in a non-traditional office.
We're just leaving the Port Authority bus terminal and we're walking on 9th Avenue. It's a little before 8 a.m. I'm working with the Breaking Ground street outreach team today.
Joanna is a street psychiatrist. She offers support to some of the city's most vulnerable residents.
I go around and see some of the folks who are staying on the street. I sort of do a little bit of outreach, engagement, in the hopes of partnering with the team to encourage them to move inside.
It's a rainy day in Midtown Manhattan, one of the busiest areas of the city. Commuters are rushing to work. Tourists are seeing the sights, and traffic grinds all day. Most of Joanna's clients are chronically homeless, people who have experienced homelessness the longest and have established their lives outside.
Yes, my first client is actually sitting right across the street. You can see him over there. We're going to stop and find a banana or something to bring him because I like to try to bring him something when I show up.
She greets her client, offers him hot coffee and a banana. He declines both. And just to note, to respect the privacy of Joanna's clients, we won't share any specific information about them or hear answers about their health during her check-ins. The conversation with her first client is just a few minutes long.
So that went the same as it almost always goes. He tolerates me, and then after a brief exchange, he'll say, "Okay, thank you for stopping by," which usually means like he's done.
The interaction seems small, but Joanna gets to know as much as she can about the health and needs of her clients.
Yeah, he's somebody who has untreated medical issues as well as psychiatric issues. In addition to like building the engagement, we'll build trust and help him get to a point where maybe he feels more comfortable letting us help him with benefits or housing.
The goal is to help people living on the street get into safe and permanent housing. So why do the outreach teams include a psychiatrist? Joanna can offer on-site therapy and prescribe medication, but it's also important her visits are on record in case there's a medical emergency. She keeps moving. A few blocks away is her next client, a man living on the sidewalk. He's set up between a couple of trees and he has a good amount of stuff. He and most of his belongings are staying dry under a plastic tarp.
Hello, are you there? Yeah, I know. I don't want you to get wet in there. Here's the coffee. You got it? Do you need anything?
He accepts the cup of coffee. Their conversation is maybe a minute long. Joanna apologizes for waking him up and tells him she'll be back next week.
Sometimes it's that short. Sometimes we talk a little bit longer. I always feel bad waking somebody up, but also feel like I gotta know that he's alive.
Making sure the clients are alive is something the street outreach teams have to be concerned about every day. And since Joanna is a psychiatrist, she's also looking for changes in her clients' mental health and well-being.
Or if somebody's really kind of hopeless, expressing a lot of hopelessness and sort of either active suicidal ideation or even just kind of passive, like, well, if I freeze to death, I freeze to death kind of thing. Those would be things that would sort of start to get into the realm of a danger to yourself, right? Or, if somebody's like clearly got kind of like unaddressed medical needs, that would be another thing to make us start thinking about. Is this a more intervention kind of situation?
And interventions do happen from time to time. Some are called involuntary removals, and these are not very common. But if a person needs emergency psychiatric or medical care, the outreach team steps in.
We do end up sometimes either calling 911 or taking someone to the hospital, and sometimes that's even involuntary because New York sort of empowers us to do involuntary removals, get them to a psychiatric emergency room for an evaluation if there's a concern that they're really, in danger because of a mental health issue.
Joanna keeps moving and hops on a crosstown bus.
Now we're going to go up to 57th Street, farther east.
Her next client is a woman the outreach teams have been visiting for a long time.
If not a decade, then almost a decade. And this is actually someone who will not even, like everybody else, we kind of know their first and last name and some of their demographic information. This person will not share anything. We know their first name.
Joanna greets her client. She's staying dry under scaffolding on 57th Street near a busy subway stop. The area is fancy. Carnegie Hall is across the street. There's a bunch of high-end restaurants nearby, and Central Park is just a few blocks up. This woman has the most stuff of anyone we've seen so far. A big shopping cart is full of tied-up plastic bags with things she's keeping. She also uses abandoned baby strollers and other carts on wheels, which come in handy if she needs to move quickly.
How are you? Hi. Yeah? You warm enough?
Yeah.
How was the weekend?
This woman is friendly and is happy to chat. Joanna suggests that she move inside before the winter.
It is cold weather coming. It's going to be code blue soon.
Joanna is patient.
Any thoughts
She's
about
compassionate, but the woman doesn't seem interested in moving off the street.
If you're ever interested, we can also, hook you up with a room at the YMCA or something for a couple of months.
Part of Joanna's treatment approach is building trust. This is something you hear often from people in homeless services.
The relationship is the treatment. And so sort of more than anything else that I have to offer as far as like medication or special therapies, just like having a relationship with somebody is often what kind of helps them feel better or do better or, move forward towards whatever goals they have. Do you need a psychiatrist to be the one walking around and doing that? Like, not always. But for some of these folks, like, I'm also waiting for the window where they might either sharing something about themselves that will enable me to be like, oh, well, maybe you qualify for this benefit, or, you've told me 3 weeks in a row you're having trouble sleeping. Maybe like there's something that I could offer you that would help with that, or whatever it is. For all of us visiting them, it's about building a relationship and trust. But for like having a psychiatrist out here to do that, part of it is to kind of like see if you can find one of those toeholds that would help somebody move towards some kind of treatment.
Joanna heads to a few more spots in Midtown Manhattan and tries to find a client she thinks may be ready to make a change.
Says he is very interested in going inside, but it has really been a struggle to kind of make that stick for, there are lots of reasons why going inside has not worked out for him.
She arrives at the spot where she typically finds the man, under a door awning near a post office. But he isn't there and all his things are gone. Joanna says this is pretty normal. Her clients move around for a lot of reasons. Bad weather. Maybe the police asked him to move and clear his things. She also worries about this client and his substance use problems. Still, Joanna keeps moving. She'll be back to look for him in a few days. For Call to Mind, I'm Jessica Bari.
You're listening to the Homelessness Crisis and Mental Health from Call to Mind. I'm Kimberly Adams. Let's stay in New York City. That's where we met 31-year-old Ashley Anderson, who was visiting the Fountain House, a type of clubhouse for people living with serious mental illnesses. Ashley uses a wheelchair because she has cerebral palsy, and her struggle with homelessness started young.
I went into the shelter system when I was 18 years old. I came out of foster care early, and there was no aftercare plan for me. So then I just found myself homeless because, there was nowhere for me to go. I didn't have family that I could just go to and be like, hey, take me in. It was a really weird experience because it was, the first time that I had ever been homeless. So this was, the first time that I kind of felt, invisible. I didn't have a roof over my head and people didn't see me as a person. And that was kind of weird.
The The first shelter Ashley went to was run by an organization with services for young people facing homelessness, but her physical disability made that shelter, and many others, difficult to stay in.
And I remember coming in and they just kind of stared at me during intake and they were like, so can you like shower on your own? Do you know how to get dressed on your own? And I'm like, yeah. That was the first time I realized that shelters aren't really wheelchair accessible and they don't really know what to do with people who have physical disabilities. And if you already have mental health issues, like not having your physical needs met exacerbates those mental health issues. So there was a lot of time where I was like really isolated and really depressed because I didn't know how to advocate for my physical needs as well as my mental health needs.
Ashley and a lot of the people we talked to described the shelters as an incredibly tough environment with too much chaos and uncertainty. To cope, she stayed busy and focused on her future.
I decided to work and go to school because I wanted to be able to be self-sustaining. And I also wanted to have something to do during the day. Because, like, being in the shelter just with no purpose, it makes you feel even worse. Your environment has a really big impact on, like, how you see yourself as a person. And internally, I felt like I failed myself, even though it really wasn't my fault. But I took it really hard and really personal. It took me a few years to, like, let go of that mentality.
Ashley shared a room with 4 women. She studied early in the morning using the flashlight on her cell phone, then went to work, then attended college classes, and then studied again at night. We asked her what kept her going.
I always had a vision of myself not homeless. And I just wanted that so bad that that's what kept me going. I would just get up every day and like, this is not going to be forever. We're going to make it out of this. But I just knew I wasn't going to be homeless forever and that it was going to work out at some point.
Ashley lived like this for about 4 years, studying, working, filling out housing applications, and waiting. In 2014, right before her birthday, she got the best gift.
I got my first apartment, and it was like the greatest birthday gift I could ever give myself. And it was really good to finally have a roof over my head, finally have a place where I felt safe, because it didn't occur to me that I had never felt safe before. It wasn't until I moved into that apartment that I was like, this is what people do when they have free time. They just go to their houses and like sit in their space, you know? Coming out of my parents' house, going into foster care, I never had anything that was mine. And so having something that was mine, it was great.
That was Ashley Anderson. She lives in her own apartment in the Bronx and has earned a master's degree in healthcare administration. You're listening to The Homelessness Crisis and Mental Health. I'm Kimberly Adams. Some people are more at risk for homelessness than others. They include people who identify as Black, Indigenous people, and youth who identify as LGBTQ+. And here's another important data point. Adults over the age of 55 are one of the fastest growing demographics of people becoming homeless for the first time. But Dr. Margot Kuchel says people in their 50s experiencing homelessness have a lot more in common with the health profile of a much older person because life on the street is so hard on their bodies. Dr. Kuchel is the director of the Benioff Homelessness and Housing Initiative and an internist at the University of California, San Francisco.
Homelessness is absolutely devastating to people's health. And sometimes I think people get fooled and they say, oh, there are not that many people in their 70s or 80s. But the terrible thing is one of the reasons that there are not so many people in their 70s and 80s who are homeless is that they die before they hit that age. But the people in the 50s and 60s have all of the characteristics of the people we normally think of in their 70s and 80s. And so what we see is a lot of falls, a lot more worsening of people's cognitive abilities, people's hearing, everything goes wrong. And so people have extraordinarily high risk of dying, extraordinarily high risk of needing to be in the hospital, and extraordinarily high risk of needing to be in a nursing home where they really wouldn't need to be in a nursing home, but they need to be in there because there are not any other options.
So what's behind this increase of homelessness amongst older people?
I mean, the cost of housing has gone up completely out of proportion to wages, benefits. So you have this population of people They are experiencing the health problems that we normally think of in much older adults earlier. And they're falling a little bit behind all the time. And, when you are 52 and your health is like a 78-year-old, you can't actually work 3 jobs and sleep 3 hours a night. And they're left with no choice.
Your research has revealed high numbers of homelessness in older people of color in particular. What role do racial disparities play in that particular group?
I don't think you can tell the story of homelessness without calling the effect of structural racism. Like we know, for instance, that Black families have much, much less wealth, not just income, but wealth than white households do. One of the things that wealth does is protect not only you, but your family members from things like homelessness, because you have that couple $1,000s to lend someone, because Black families have been left out of home purchasing. So Black households are much less likely to own housing. One of the things you can do when you own a home is welcome other people into it. If you own your home and your cousin's going through a bad time, you can say to your cousin, hey, come sleep in my extra bedroom, sleep on my couch. If you're a renter, you actually can't do that. They don't really have the option to say, grandpa, uncle, come live with us, because that's a lease violation.
What changes, if any, do you think should happen in this country for us to meaningfully change the way we approach trying to help unhoused people?
The most important thing is that we have to increase the supply of housing for extremely low income households. Right now in our country, if you qualify for housing assistance, only 1 in 4 of the households who qualify for rental assistance get it. That's a decision Congress could reverse. We could have more money spent on creating housing for low income people, on subsidizing its ongoing costs. And then we need to align our health systems to provide the care that people need to thrive in that housing. Because we are providing those services, we're just doing it in the most expensive and least effective way, and we can do better.
That was Dr. Margot Kuchel from the University of California, San Francisco. You're listening to The Homelessness Crisis and Mental Health from Call to Mind. I'm Kimberly Adams. Throughout this program, we've heard experts say helping people who are living homeless in the United States has a clear solution: housing. We've also heard that a truly concerted effort to provide housing will take political will from governments and from the American people. So what does a public investment to end homelessness look like? In 2022, the Department of Veterans Affairs permanently housed more than 40,000 previously homeless veterans. In the New Orleans area, the program for homeless veterans has been particularly effective. Reporter Eve Abrams explains that a major push to help homeless vets launched there nearly a decade ago.
How you doing?
Ernest Baptiste lives half a block from the streetcar, the Canal Street line. But he doesn't take it to work. What would be the point?
I mean, I can walk. And it's not far. I mean, why take the streetcar, when I'm going to get right off of it, so I like to walk.
Ernest is just 15 minutes by foot from his job at Veterans Hospital. He empties trash cans, cuts grass, pressure washes the garage, that sort of thing. To get there, he takes the side streets, past houses, trees, every time, the same route.
Sunday through Thursday. Sunday through Thursday, that's my schedule.
Ernest is 64, tall, slim. His circle beard, mustache, and sideburns, they're all neatly trimmed and going gray. Ernest tells me his job isn't permanent, more like something to get him back in the habit and flow of working. It's part of a program for veterans. The VA, Veterans Administration, has a fancy name for it: compensated work therapy.
They give you little jobs throughout the hospital to help you, the guys that been out of work for a while, just to, help you get back in the habit of working. Maybe you might like what you're doing and try to apply that down the way. I think it lasts anywhere from 6 months to a year. And then you give other veterans a chance to get it.
Ernest has a spotty work history because of his decades-long struggle with substance use, mostly crack cocaine. It started after his discharge from the Army.
I'll come home and I just started making bad choices, started hanging around the wrong crowd. And I never was a really bad person. I just was making bad decisions, doing drugs. I was just surviving, pillar to post here in New Orleans, pillar to post, pillar to post. And yeah, I was homeless. Oh, yeah.
But now Ernest is sober, and he has a place to live.
And to the right.
His apartment is in a big brick building. It's far from fancy.
My little cubby hole. You know how I look at this place? I look at it like it's just a spot for me to get myself together, and save my money and come up. I wasn't putting no sofas and nothing in here. All right. Yeah, it's just my little efficiency. That's it. My little bedroom, my little closet.
There's space for a bed, TV, chair. Ernest's kitchen is the hallway by his front door. The sink is tiny.
Yeah, the sink, you barely get a plate in there. You got to turn the plate sideways and rinse it off.
The one-burner stove is also tiny, but that doesn't bother Ernest.
I don't cook. I'm a microwave type of a guy.
And to understand how Ernest got that microwave and this entire apartment, we have to go back in time to the summer of 2014, when First Lady Michelle Obama challenged U.S. mayors to eradicate veteran homelessness in their cities. She called it the Mayor's Challenge to End Veteran Homelessness. Now, ending homelessness among veterans is technically kind of impossible, since new vets are constantly falling into homelessness. But in 2015, New Orleans reached something called functional zero, meaning any veteran in New Orleans needing a home can get one in about a month or less. According to the most recent point-in-time count from Unity of Greater New Orleans, a nonprofit organization committed to ending homelessness, 1,390 people are unhoused. Just 50 of them are veterans, living either in emergency shelters or unsheltered. But if they want it, those veterans can still get a permanent home in around 30 days. How did that happen? Martha Kegel heads Unity. She says she and then Mayor Mitch Landrieu resolved New Orleans would be first.
We did that by deciding that we were going to use whatever resources we had.
Kegel says New Orleans was already in a housing mindset. Back in 2005, the city was devastated by Hurricane Katrina. So many people lost their homes, and the city's homeless population soared. So in response,
we had been housing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and we had really driven the numbers of people experiencing homelessness so far down that we felt like we should be able to do this, given the fact that there was so many more resources for veterans than any other subpopulation of people experiencing homelessness.
The VA in New Orleans has street outreach teams and all sorts of personnel working to get homeless vets under a stable roof.
The VA has case managers, social workers, nurses, psychiatrists, peer support specialists, housing specialists. So we have a team that is working with a veteran.
Eric Olson is the VA's homeless program manager in Greater New Orleans. He says not only does the VA offer comprehensive wraparound services, like Ernest Baptiste's compensated work therapy at the hospital, these services are available for a veteran's lifetime. Other folks in the community, civilians, they might get access to a great program, but that access probably only lasts for a few months.
And that's the difference between the community and the VA. The VA, we've put a ton of resources and money and staff into supporting veterans. But if you're a civilian and you fall, there may not be anybody there. It may just be the streets of New Orleans.
In New Orleans and across the country, government programs to help non-veterans find a home, receive mental health care, drug treatment, they don't nearly keep up with the need. But when it comes to veterans, it's a different story.
If somebody risked their life for the rest of us, and even if they didn't actually see combat, by going into the military, they knew that they could be forced into combat at any point, and they made that sacrifice. And then when they returned to civilian life, really, it's acceptable to have them have to sleep on the sidewalk?
Over the last 12 years, veteran homelessness in the city has decreased by 89%, according to Unity of Greater New Orleans. And that brings us back to Ernest Baptiste. His quest for stability started with a home. Then he kicked drugs, got a job, and now? Now he has the luxury of doing the deep work of figuring out who he is.
I kind of feel like now I got to learn myself all over again now because I'm not drugging now. So I got to learn what I like to do.
People tell Ernest, now that he's got a place and some steady work, he should find a lady friend.
But I'm trying to learn me first in order before I can go meet somebody. I want to have that peace with me so that way I'm happy. Then I can bring that to another companion or a friend. But right now, yeah, I'm just trying to learn me. I feel like I'm in another time zone or something right now, you know?
The time zone of a home, a stable place where Ernest Baptiste can work on everything else in life. For Call to Mind, I'm Eve Abrams in New Orleans.
We started our program with John Felice at the Times Square Supportive Housing Residence. After nearly 2 decades on the streets of New York, John now gets the care he needs for his mental illness and other health issues. He says he smokes a little pot now and then to relax, but that he's been successful in his recovery from alcohol and hard drugs. John takes his psychiatric medications faithfully, and his anxiety is under control.
When they first showed me Dr. Maddox, Jill Maddox on North 6th Street, when I got in the office, she said, "You seem anxious." When I saw Dr. Farrell for the first time, that's the same thing he said to me. "You seem anxious." So I stopped caffeine. I drink decaf coffee now. And with his pills, I'm so thankful. I don't smoke that many cigarettes no more. Who knew a few pills would enable me to just live a more comfortable life? I wouldn't have to go open up a bottle of vodka to feel calm. I stopped it all. Thank you. I'm blessed.
John holds up his set of keys, showing them off with a big smile.
You don't know what this key means to me. This key means so much to me. I live in Midtown Manhattan, man. You serious? I've been blessed, man, I'll tell you.
You've been listening to The Homelessness Crisis and Mental Health, a broadcast special from Call to Mind, American Public Media's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health. Support for this program is provided by the Sozo Safe Foundation and the David and Laura Lovell Foundation. This program was produced and written by our senior producer, Jessica Bari, and edited by Stephen Smith. Our technical director is Alex Simpson. Annika Best and Nancy Rosenbaum provided production support for this show. A special thanks to Rick Carr for additional editing, and this show was hosted by me, Kimberly Adams. Follow Call to Mind on our social channels at Call to Mind Now. And find resources and all our past programs on our website, calltomindnow.org. Thank you for joining us for The Homelessness Crisis and Mental Health, a broadcast special by Call to Mind from American Public Media.